So, Lone Rider here, and I thought I'd do something a little different. I was sitting here and I was watching a video. This is actually the one I saw earlier where a cyclist was riding down the street in England and the pedestrian stepped out in front of him. Didn't end well. Nobody was hurt, but could have been really bad. So I figured I would look at the comment section because it seems to me there's a little bit more to unpack here than what I already talked about in terms of people trying to justify the folks being distracted by cell phones. So here we have from Paul Bradley, another loan like borrowed. Presumably he means loan like Lone Ranger or Lone Rider, but he spelled it very differently, as you can see. Loan, woman to intimidate, again with a full mugshot. And then something about he's on his way to a biker's meet and they hope he gets raped. It's like, what? Like, what is wrong with these people? They can't even spell, first of all. I mean, go back to grade school. Unless, I know there are different conventions in England, and this is an English cyclist, but, like, what the hell? And then it says nothing to the bike people on the road, though. Or say nothing to the bike people on the road. There was, after the incident shown in the video where the cyclist was riding and there was a pedestrian that was on the cell phone and nearly stepped off the curb in front of him without looking, which is what prompted this whole thing. The video was put up there as basically a PSA to basically say, don't do that, pay attention. Later on, right before the video ended, as he was driving down the road, there were a handful of cyclists that had pulled over and stopped on the side. Some of them were standing on the sidewalk, dismounted. Some of them were, I think one was standing in the street, but he was right up against the curb in the gutter. So he says nothing to the bike people standing in the road, though. Yeah, because they weren't blocking anybody and they weren't doing anything unsafe. Moving on. So we have the next one here. Quoting a highway code rule, presumably from England. Watch out for pedestrians crossing a road onto which you are turning. If they have started to cross, they have priority, so give way. Blah, blah, blah. Watch out for cyclists, wheelchairs, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that this person isn't deliberately being asinine. But I am going to raise the question, how are you supposed to give way if you have no idea that you're going to be expected to give way? Real life isn't a magic show, and you can't just, put on the brakes and screech to a stop without warning and without consequences. If you try and slam on your brakes in a car, you could skid, lose control, hit somebody else, etc. If you try to slam on your brakes on a bike, you could do all of that, but you could also fall and be injured, whether or not you hit anybody else. If I'm on a bike and you expect me to yield right of way or slow down or stop or whatever, you have to give me warning. It's that simple. You say, well, he should have stopped. How should he have known he was supposed to stop? Well, if the pedestrian has started to cross, they have priority. That's the whole problem. The pedestrian didn't start to cross until the bike was right in front of him. Why? Because the pedestrian was not watching where she was going. Moving on. We have another one. Pedestrians shouldn't have to yield to traffic at crosswalks. It should be the other way around. But even if she was legally wrong, I don't know what the law says where you were completely rude about it. I think I touched on this before, but rude is a relative thing. What would be considered rude to say to somebody who was, let's say, walking down the street and wished you good morning, is a hell of a lot different than what would be considered rude in terms of words or tone of voice if you're addressing somebody who nearly caused you to be physically harmed due to their negligence and carelessness. I think I gave the example when I was talking about this before. If I'm at the archery range and somebody is being a dumbass and they're not looking where they're going, they shoot their bow and the arrow goes like into the wall right next to me, I'm going to be like, what the heck is wrong with you? Why don't you watch where you're shooting that thing? You almost shot me. That's not an appropriate way to address somebody who's passing you in the street and wishes you good morning. It is, however, an appropriate way to address somebody who nearly shot you because they were being a dumb arse. Why? Because you're reacting to a situation they've created. This isn't just, well, what's rude, generally speaking. No, this is what's rude when you're addressing somebody who physically endangered your safety because they were being a moron. And only because they were being a moron. Not because there was any understandable reason for it. What's rude in that case is very different than what's rude, again, if you're just talking to somebody. So, did he raise his voice a little? Yeah. So what? Under the circumstances, completely not rude. It's like they're dropping the context here. Then another one for FFS, I assume that means for bleep's sake. That was a bit harsh. Check the highway code with references to turning from a major to a minor road. Observation and giving way to pedestrians. Okay, there's a second part he talks about here, but let's talk about this first. Again, he talks about yielding right of way to pedestrians or giving way to pedestrians. The pedestrian wasn't in the street until she suddenly was, and there was no indication to indicate to observers that she would be about to cross. Why? She never stopped, looked up, etc. Essentially, you're blaming the cyclist for failing to respond to visual cues that he was incapable of responding to because the pedestrian never gave them. She just walked right the F out in front of him. And at the last minute, of course. So again, you're supposed to stop and yield. Okay. To do that safely, you have to start back there. Back there, was there any indication that there was a pedestrian about to cross the street? Absolutely not. Why? Because she wasn't paying attention. Yeah. Moving on. The next thing he says is, also by her features, there is a chance she was not a local but a tourist, and her understanding of English may be lacking. Why shout at her? Are you trying to alienate tourists now? Get a life. Okay, so first what he's saying is, you should have yielded to the pedestrian, which we've addressed. It's kind of hard to yield to somebody who you don't know is there until they throw themselves in front of you at the last minute, where a chance to actually slow down, yield, stop, or even just flat out dodge them effectively has already passed you by because they waited too long to throw themselves out in the road. Then he says, by her facial features, there's a chance she's not a local but a tourist, and her understanding of English may be lacking. Why shout at her? Are you trying to alienate tourists now? Okay, so is he saying, I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. He seems to be saying, one, he doesn't understand what right-of-way means, and he thinks it's a magic force field, and giving way is even possible at this point, considering everything the pedestrian did leading up to this, which is a major problem with a lot of these things. I think people just don't understand what right-of-way means or how it works. It's a social and legal convention, and as such, you have to let people know when they're supposed to yield right-of-way. If you just throw yourself out from behind a blind corner or without warning or looking up into the roadway, you've given nobody any time to actually stop a yield. So, like right-of-way, I mean, it's physics at this point, not right-of-way. And by the way, pedestrians have the right-of-way doesn't mean pedestrians can go around being reckless dipshits. Moving on. He seems to be saying in the second part that when he talks about looks like she might be a tourist and her understanding of English may be lacking. Now, tourists are notorious for getting lost when they go visit different places, which is understandable. We've all been a tourist somewhere. I remember my first time going to New York, which, since I'm from New Jersey, isn't that very far. But I remember my first time going to New York by myself, and I'm walking around Manhattan, and I'm looking around. I'm kind of lost. And excuse me, I'm just trying to ask passersby what directions were. And everybody's like just walking by and, bumping into me. And like nobody can stop and give you directions. And it really reminded me of the old joke. What was it? Something about, yeah. Can you tell me how to get to the Empire State Building, or should I just go F myself? Is it right? I mean, seriously. A lot of times people are rude to tourists. I get that. And that seems to be what he's saying here. You're rude to her because she's not from the area and she doesn't know. Here's the thing. Understanding of English is not necessary to know that you have to know where you're going. I'm sure they have the same concept of physics in China or Timbuktu or Spain or France or Poland or wherever the hell she's from. Right? If she is in fact a tourist. If she's from somewhere else where they don't speak English, okay, fair enough, but then you're left with the question, they still look where they're going in that place, right? So the issue shouldn't be, does she understand it when after she fails to look where she's going and causes this whole thing, and then he says, put that phone down and pay attention. The issue isn't does she understand him after that point. The issue is If she failed to understand English adequately because she was a tourist or for any reason, frankly, should that have impacted her ability to look where she's going and know that she has to look where she's going, especially when she enters traffic? No, it's not. Unless the issue is, did she see a sign that said, put down your phone and pay attention, and could she read it? But no, this is just a common thing. You have to look where you're going, or you could get hurt or cause somebody else to get hurt. It's just common freaking sense. It's what we tell 5-year-olds and toddlers. So being able to understand English, whether or not that was an issue in this particular incident, in terms of her being able to understand English, the point is, even if she was completely deaf and couldn't understand any language except for sign language, the point is that shouldn't affect her ability to watch where she's going. That's just something you should know as a grown adult, right? Who's out and about in public. If you're allowed to be out and about and walking around in public unsupervised, then you should know to watch where the hell you're going. It's just that simple. So, but there's well, maybe she didn't understand English. And, oh, by the way, if you don't understand the language of the country and in the process you cause an accident, that's not an excuse. That's negligence, right? Moving on. So, even if it was, well, this whole thing happened because she didn't understand English, if that's the case, that's not an excuse. That's an admission of negligence right there. It'll be like driving down the street when you can't read enough English to read the road signs, right? And then somebody else says, in my country, the pedestrian has the right of way in these situations. I don't know what his country is, but I don't know of any country where the laws of physics allow somebody to do this and not nearly cause an accident. Again, right of way isn't the issue if you don't give the person time to respond and yield. That's the whole point. That right of way is simply a convention that governs human action. It's a social and legal convention. It's not a Harry Potter magic spell. So if you don't give the person time to react to the right of way that you have established by crossing the street, then right of way just isn't an issue, period. The issue is physics and can they stop before there's an accident. And if you set in motion events that lead to a collision, whoever gets hurt, them, you, or a third party, it's your fault because you jumped into the street without looking. You might have it hard about whether somebody else contributed fault, but the primary cause is you jumping in the street without looking. Grow up and accept responsibility for your actions. Another person says, odious man, won't be long before a member of the public retaliates. So apparently he thinks it's odious that somebody put together a public service announcement saying, look where you're going and don't be on your cell phone when you enter traffic. What's odious about that? Then he says, it won't be long before a member of the public retaliates. So is he hoping that you'll have a drunk run a stop sign, nearly hit a pedestrian, nearly hit a bicyclist, nearly hit another driver, and then people will, the drunk will respond by attacking the people he nearly hit because they dare to have the umbrage to call him out for being reckless? It's the same here. Somebody nearly causes an accident by being reckless, whether because they're drunk or in this case on a cell phone, and you want them to retaliate, i.e. attack the person that they nearly injured by accident? And presumably what he's saying is he wants idiots on cell phones to march blindly out in the traffic, and then when they nearly cause somebody to be injured and that person criticizes them for it, rightly so, he wants them to try and, I guess, physically assault that person then for daring to point out that they're breaking the rules and any precept of common sense? Are you out of your mind? Moving on. Serious question, Paul. On this one, I fully agree she was in the wrong and should have looked before crossing. But what exactly do you think uploading it to YouTube is going to achieve? Well, okay, here's a guy who actually seems to have sort of gotten the point of this. That the problem is that somebody is talking on a cell phone and not looking where they're going when they step out into traffic. And yes, a guy on a bike is traffic. Here's the deal. What does he expect to accomplish by posting it on YouTube? What does he think it's going to achieve? Well, hopefully make people aware that this is a problem and a safety issue, and that if you're not paying attention to the cell phone, not only are you a dumbass, but you're actually putting yourself and people around you in potential physical danger. Like I said, it was basically a public service announcement. Don't be like that person. This is dangerous. What did you hope to accomplish by posting it on YouTube? Well, because this isn't just about this single person in this single location, but it's about a widespread pattern of behavior. What he hoped to accomplish was to call attention to that widespread pattern of careless and reckless behavior, and hopefully, spark some kind of a change so that people can be more responsible and less like jackasses. Moving on. Do you really have to scream in people's faces? As someone with anxiety, I would probably run away crying. There's no need to scare young girls. Can't you just do your horn and move on? Presumably this person meant beep the horn. Now, here's the thing. I think I addressed this before when I talked about this particular comment. He wasn't screaming in anybody's face. Again, he raised his voice a little, but what's considered rude when somebody nearly causes you to be physically injured because they're being stupid is different than what's considered rude if somebody wishes you good morning and you're simply responding to them. Context is key. So, was he screaming? No. Was he rude? No. As to if you have anxiety and you would react in a disproportionate way, such as by running away crying, to a normal reaction to this situation. And keep in mind, if you're putting yourself in the position of the pedestrian and saying that you would run away crying if he talked to you like that, you're also putting yourself in the position of the pedestrian that caused the incident. So picture, if you cause somebody to nearly have an accident by being reckless and not paying attention, being stupid, and they chide you for it. Hey, look where you're going. And your response to that, rather than saying, oh, my bad, I wasn't looking where I was going and I should be more careful next time. If your response to that is disproportionate, whether it's to rage against the person who's pointing out your reckless stupidity that nearly endangered him, or whether it's to burst into tears and run home crying, if you react disproportionately to a normal response to your actions, that's on you. You're the one with the abnormal response, right? Somebody runs a red light, nearly hits me, and I go, watch where you're going. If that person's response is to burst into tears and run home, they're the one with a problem. Not only because they're behaving carelessly by running red lights, or in this case, talking on the cell phone, not looking where they're going, but then when somebody points that out to them, instead of saying, okay, I should be more careful, it's, oh, you're so mean. Look, anxiety is a real thing, and if you've got some, psychological issue, I'm sorry for you, and I hope it gets better. I hope you find a way to deal with that. But if you're going to if that's going to be your excuse for this behavior, that, well, if he talked to me like that, I'd go home in tears. Yeah, so it doesn't change the fact that his response is normal considering the danger the pedestrian put him in. If you would have an unusual reaction to that because you have some mental issue like anxiety, I'm sorry for you, but it doesn't change the fact that this cyclist didn't do anything wrong and the person who caused the near accident did. Moving on. Somebody else saying the bike people stood in the road. Again, there were dismounted cyclists who were essentially pedestrians at that point, off to the side of the road. Well, I think one of them or two may have been standing in the road, way up against the curb in the gutter where they weren't obstructing anybody. The rest were standing off to the sidewalk. So why is this an issue? When you dismount a bike, yeah, you're standing as a pedestrian at that point. So whether you're a vehicle operator on the bike when you're moving, you dismount, you're somebody on foot. So if you're standing off to the side where a pedestrian would be standing, or on the sidewalk where a pedestrian would be standing, what's wrong with that? They weren't standing in the middle of the road. They weren't doing anything stupid. And they were looking around and paying attention, unlike this woman on the cell phone. Moving on. Another person says, pedestrian has priority in this situation. Again, priority and some kind of issue of right-of-way isn't an issue if you don't give a person time to assess that priority and react to it. If you throw yourself into traffic, the issue isn't right-of-way. It's you're being negligent. You're not paying attention to what the F you're doing. Somebody else just simply wrote harassment. Okay, is that you're harassing the cyclist for posting this, or is that you think he's harassing this supposedly innocent person who nearly committed manslaughter? I honestly don't know. And then several more comments. The bus one, this is interesting. Somebody says, one of the things he said to the pedestrian was, be careful, it could be a bus next time. And the person here says, if you were a bus, you wouldn't be going down that road, you idiot. And then he says something, a bit like the time you threatened my brother about 20 years ago about him being dead if you were a 10-ton lorry on a street that they are banned on. Now, if you remember an interaction that your brother allegedly had with a cyclist, simply pointing out to him that if he jumped in front of a 10-ton lorry, which is a big truck, instead of the bicyclist, that he could have been injured. If you're gonna hold a grudge about that kind of a common sense warning from 20 years ago, you've got issues, or your brother has issues. I'm sorry. That you would characterize such a warning as threatening your brother is beside the point, and that you're going to say, well, yeah, he pointed out that if he jumped in front of a truck instead of him on his bike, that guy could have been careful, so, could have been hurt, so we should be more careful. But hey, 10-ton lorries are banned on that street, so what's the point? The point is that that individual is not just going to commit acts of carelessness on that particular street. This is probably how they generally conduct themselves. Just like the same person pointing out, if you were a bus, you wouldn't be going down that road, you idiot. Why is he an idiot? He's not suggesting that next time it might be a bus in this particular location because the incident's going to repeat itself like Groundhog Day at this exact same time and place. No, what he is suggesting is that this is a way that this person repeatedly conducts themselves, a pattern of reckless and careless behavior, and that next time she's out in public on any street, there might be a bus there. After all, I'm sure this isn't the only street on which this person chooses to not watch where they're going. The fact that a warning like that would be construed as threatening, I find is funny. It indicates concern for the safety of the pedestrian. It would be one thing if the bicyclist said, "You moron, you almost hit me." Instead, he said, "Put that thing down and watch where you're going. It could be a bus next time." Presumably indicating not only concern for his safety, but that of the pedestrian, lest she do this in a situation where she steps in front of a bus. Which, again, is not necessarily that situation. Why? The whole point is that this isn't an isolated issue, an isolated single incident. It's a widespread pattern of a problem of behavior that's committed by people all over the place. I mean, the other day I was at work and somebody was circulating a warning that, don't use your cell phones during work time. I kind of laughed because I'm thinking to myself, who would do that? We're not talking about, 5-year-olds or even teenagers. We're talking about grown adult people here. Who the hell's going to be using their cell phone at work? Unless they're on lunch break or something. People are easily distracted and have self-imposed ADD. And we see this with people who will risk their job to text their BFF or check on Facebook. They will probably also risk their safety. And we've seen, whether it's people behind the wheel, people walking. I've even seen other bicyclists do this, using their cell phones while they're going down the street. Not many, but some. It's more prevalent with drivers and, in particular, pedestrians as well. And I think that's why this guy posted this video, to just say, hey, be careful, don't be like this person, don't be an idiot. Instead, everybody's denouncing this guy and saying he's mean and he's awful and he's an idiot. No, he's the only one here who makes sense, okay? I don't know this guy from Adam, and I'm not defending him because, I have any stake in the issue. Just as a rational observer looking at this, I'm saying to myself, you're riding down the street, you're minding your own beeswax, and somebody jumps in front of you. And how are you supposed to know that that's going to happen? How are you supposed to be able to predict that? And why does this make you the bad guy? Right? Why does it make you the bad guy to say, be careful and watch where you're going?
Put your phone down and look before you cross, okay? Might be a bus next time.
Makes sense to me.